Well, and here we are again, folks. Glad to see y'all. It's been a big change in the weather, and things are happening. Kids are back to school, and some of you are back to work, and then we got a big holiday weekend we just went through, and by golly, it's a busy time, isn't it? So that's why sitting around this campfire with me and telling stories is going to give you a little relaxation. Maybe all you get this week. So come on in, get you something to drink, sit down, and I want to tell you a story. Some more of this Hank Dillon, Bigfoot hunter. Ginger's been busy, and this story's getting good. So let's get started. Now, this is Project Silva, the Cryptid War begins, part 9. And if you don't know where we are now, I kind of think you should go back and read the last couple of chapters of this. And you can find as far back as you want to go. It's all in the library on the Hidden Corners YouTube. Well, let's get started now. We're at part 9. The Cryptid War begins. The storm broke not with a single voice, but with many. The glow of multiple monitors lit Wade's cramped office. This is it, Wade muttered, sweat streaking his temples. Every contact, every source, we hit them all at once, coordinated. They can't shut it all down if it explodes everywhere at the same time. Wade typed multiple messages like a man possessed. And in a sense, he was a man possessed, with a mission to expose the truth. Wade hit the send key, then opened the floodgates. Dozens of packets of classified data, redacted memos, satellite images, and testimonies. All of it began transmitting through a web of anonymous drops, each set to cascade into journalists' inboxes within the hour. "Are you ready?" he asked Michelle, who was handling the YouTube connections. "I've got Cam Buckner's number right here, and Clay Steele's, and I'm ready as soon as you give the word." "Hank?" "Yeah, me too. I've got NBC 9 News and CBS Colorado, Fox 31 out of Denver, and Colorado Public Radio." "That's a good start," Wade replied. Hank looked up from his computer monitor. "And Tom Sheffield will be here any minute with Darnell and Dusty. Darnell has all kinds of Washington, D.C. connections and copies of all the original Project Silva files on a thumb drive. And Darnell's daughter, Dusty, has all her mom's former contacts. So her mom was the original whistleblower on Project Silva. Unfortunately, she was silenced before she could get the word out. You know, come to think of it, she probably knew Dad." Wade leaned back in his chair and folded his arms behind his head. "I wonder how Ghost Horse is doing with contacting Jacob. We need all this to flow seamlessly." Michelle smiled. "You know, this is all pretty scary, not knowing what fallback we're going to receive, but it feels good to be taking action." "Yeah, it does," Hank agreed with her. The stars burned cold and sharp above, and Ghost Horse sat cross-legged by the remains of a fire, smoke curling skyward, carrying with it the scent of sage. His eyes were closed, his breathing steady. It felt as if he had been waiting for this moment for hours, for days, perhaps for years. He felt the faint pulse, that flicker he knew too well, a ripple not in the air but deep in the marrow of his bones. He opened his eyes. "Jacob," Ghost Horse whispered into the darkness. Far from his quiet campfire, deep in the wilderness where no road reached, Jacob Dillon, Hybrid 013, lifted his head. The sound wasn't in his ears but inside his skull, threading through his blood, reverberating like a low drum. "It is time to let the world know you exist," Ghost Horse's voice carried across the distance, unbroken by silence, unchained by miles. Jacob's breath was ragged, half human, half feral. His heart hammered. For years his existence had been stolen, locked away and denied, but now the walls had crumbled. Now the lies were unraveling. He bared his teeth, not in rage, not in fear, but in grim resolve. Not just me, he answered, echoing in Ghost Horse's mind. All of us. The fire snapped, as if reacting to the weight of those words. Ghost Horse bowed his head. He had always known it would come to this. The government thought they could contain the truth and brand it a hoax, and bury it in ridicule. But Jacob was right. He was not alone. Somewhere in the Rockies, a howl tore across the night, long and mournful. Not Jacob's. Another. And then another. A chorus building from the timberline where hidden things stirred in caves and thickets, creatures that had remained hidden for centuries. Ghost Horse closed his eyes, the corners of his mouth tightening. As he knelt by his dwindling campfire, his eyes glowing with the reflection of the flames, he whispered chants in Lakota, words that pulled ancestral memory out of the ethos. The flames leapt higher, and in the smoke, shapes appeared. Wolves, towering shadow shapes, winged silhouettes that stretched far beyond anyone's imagination. He bowed his head in reverence. The time of shadows was ending. The time of revelation had begun. In a large lab on the University of Colorado Boulder campus, Elliot and Ray huddled over the relics. Hours of analysis had yielded results that didn't appear in any textbook. The small black shard of what they thought was obsidian glass was infused with properties that defied material science. Radiation signatures pulsed like a heartbeat. The object contained microscopic structures that weren't naturally formed. Non-terrestrial. This isn't from here, Elliot whispered. Ray laughed nervously, rubbing his eyes with both hands. You think I dragged this in here to be tested because I thought it was a shaving off of an arrowhead? They looked at each other, both realizing the enormity of what sat between them. I want to know exactly where you found this, Elliot said. There might be more. Ray hesitated. Look, I can't tell you that, he said, and it's not likely that there is any more items left at that site. I'm sorry, I just can't divulge any more information than that. Elliot gave him a quizzical look, but didn't ask any more questions. Not yet. They'd been waiting for the test results on the tooth, which just then came across the computer screen. Well, this is interesting, Elliot shrugged, hunched over the computer monitor. He had run the analysis 3 times now, thinking perhaps that the first 2 had been corrupted or miscalibrated, but each test had come back the same. The tooth fragment that Ray had dropped into his hands wasn't human, and it wasn't animal. At least not any catalog species known to biology. Non-human DNA. The mass spectrometry report was the first red flag. The isotope ratios didn't match anything typical of North American fauna, yet the strontium signature suggested a diet high in both wild vegetation and protein sources not usually associated with a single species. Herbivore and carnivore traits existed side by side, like something evolution hadn't yet decided on. Elliot rubbed his face, his palms clammy with sweat. The genetic sequencing was even worse. The DNA contained long stretches identical to Homo sapiens, enough that at first it appeared to be degraded human remains. But then there were sections, vast, sprawling blocks that bore no similarity to any primate known to science. The software struggled to even categorize the results, flagging them with a blinking error code as though refusing to accept what it was seeing. A cold shiver crawled down Elliot's spine. The mitochondrial DNA suggested that the species, or whatever it was, had diverged from humans perhaps 50,000 years ago, yet the dental enamel showed signs of it being relatively young. This wasn't a fossil. This wasn't some ancient relic that had eroded its way out of a glacier or been unearthed in a landslide. This was recent, alive. He leaned back in his chair, his heart hammering. What the hell? He whispered into the sterile silence of the lab, "What the hell did you bring me?" He opened the scanning electron images again. The tooth surface showed wear patterns consistent with an omnivorous diet, but there was something else. Microfractures in the enamel, too symmetrical, too patterned, as if the owner hadn't just chewed with it, but had used it like a tool. Elliot felt his mouth go dry. This wasn't just an animal. This came from an intelligent being. He pushed his chair back, stood up, and began pacing. Every rational part of his training and education told him to log the find officially, to submit it for peer review, to allow the process of science to take its course. But another, louder voice told him that this was just too big. If this was what it seemed to be, it would never see the light of day. Someone, government, military, would bury it before the world even knew what had been discovered. Elliot returned to his desk, hands trembling as he copied the data to a personal drive. "We can't sit on this," he muttered to Ray, fingers tightening on the drive. "What we have here, what you have here, is bigger than either of us can imagine. If I were you, Ray, I wouldn't keep this quiet. Not at all. Now, I can either submit these items for peer review, and they'll probably never see the light of day, or you can go straight to the press and show them what you found. If it were me, I'd head straight to the Denver Post." Elliot stared at the object sitting on the desk in front of him. "This is big, Ray. This is big." The body had lain for weeks on the uneven stone floor of the old adobe farmhouse. The eccentric old man who kept to himself, living out in the desert where no one cares who you were or what you did. Flies had burrowed into the body, and now the coyotes were digging their way into the house looking for food. The smell of rotten human flesh capturing their senses. The stench was unbearable. The sheriff swallowed hard against the sour taste in the back of his throat, held an old red bandana to his nose. Earl Rollins, or Frank Sterling, whatever his name was, had been a recluse, and the county had long since stopped worrying about him. Folks said he'd been a professor once, or maybe a government man, something about spending some time in a mental ward. Others whispered that he was just a desert rat who'd gone half mad under the sun. Either way, no one had bothered to look in on him. Well, not until now, when the smell had reached the road and a passing rancher had followed it over here. The sheriff shifted his weight on the creaking floorboards, eyes flickering over the glass jars lined along the warped shelves. Some were clouded with murky fluids, others still clear enough that the contents were plain. Bones of small animals, twisted roots, cloudy specimens that might once have been snakes or lizards. One jar contained something he didn't want to identify, a mass of tissue suspended in liquid that twitched faintly, though he told himself it was only the flies moving underneath. The sheriff adjusted the bandana he was holding over his nose, squinting at a desk in the corner. Notebooks lay stacked in uneven piles, pages curling with mildew, but the writing was meticulous. Tight rows of script, diagrams, and chemical formulas that made no sense to him. There were maps, too, circles and markings scrawled across them with X's denoting something he couldn't begin to guess at. Mouse droppings were everywhere, all over the papers and the maps. "What a stinking mess," he muttered under his breath, careful not to touch anything. Someone should just light a match to this old place and burn it all down. But he knew better than that. He'd have to call it in, get the forensic investigator out here, make sure he died of natural causes. The body, or what was left of it, would have to be formally identified, and next of kin, if there were any, notified. He lingered just a moment longer, his gaze pulled towards the far wall. There was a large, dust-covered crate pushed into the shadows, bound with rusted chains and an old padlock. Cobwebs stretched from the crate to the walls and the ceiling. A faded warning had been scrawled across its lid in black paint, half flaked away. "Do not open." The sheriff felt his skin crawl. His first instinct was to follow his earlier thought. Burn it all down. Be gone with it. But duty gnawed at him, stubborn and unrelenting. He turned, heading for the doorway, the stench following him out. The investigative team would come, the local newspaper too, and they'd handle the body, catalog the notebooks, photograph the jars. They'd open that crate too. And God help them when they did. In his office at the Nellis Air Force Base, Colonel Harris sat in his quarters, uniform jacket folded neatly on the chair. A bottle of bourbon opened but untouched. The decision had his stomach in knots. Duty had always been simple, his loyalty unquestioned. But this, the extermination orders, the cold-blooded precision which his superiors had spoken about lives as if they were trash to be incinerated, it just broke something in him. He stared at the flash drive in his hand, months of internal communications, recordings, documents he had quietly copied when he knew he shouldn't, proof that the chain of command had decided not only to silence Project Silva, but to silence anyone connected to it. Proof of what had occurred at Facility Black Dome. And now, this new development. His wife's picture sat on the desk, smiling from behind the glass. Harris touched it once, then slid it aside. His career was already over. His life might follow. But at least his conscience would no longer be caged. He picked up the phone and he made the call. A reporter at the Washington Post, one he knew could be trusted. His voice was steady when she answered. "My name is Colonel David Harris. I have information regarding a program by the name of Project Silva. I think that it's time that you heard what's been happening inside your government." By nightfall, a tremor had begun to spread across the entire media landscape. Anonymous leaks hit journalists' inboxes. Secure phones called buzzed editors awake. Relics were photographed and encrypted files were shared. Eyewitnesses recounted chilling orders from generals, strange experiments, cover-ups that stretched from Washington to the Rocky Mountains and beyond. Some reporters hesitated. This was too big, too wild, too dangerous. But others smelled history in the making. They ran with it. By the time the sun rose, Project Silva was no longer a secret whispered in dark corners. It was splashed across feeds, shouted on live streams, discussed in newsrooms and bars and breakfast tables. The government scrambled. Denials were drafted, but the dam had cracked. And through it poured testimony, evidence, voices that refused to be silenced. The morning the stories broke, there wasn't a single news outlet in America that wasn't running some variation of it. From podcasts to primetime television, the headlines screamed across every channel. Headlines like, "Evidence of Cryptid Cover-Up, Whistleblowers Go Public," or "Is the U.S. Military Hiding Monsters?" and "Colonel Blows Whistle on Classified Creature Program." You know, the White House press secretary took the podium that morning with tight lips and tired eyes. Cameras flashed as she dismissed the outlandish allegations as fabrications, the work of disgruntled ex-employees and opportunistic grifters. "This administration has no evidence," she said, "of any so-called cryptid weaponization program. The individuals making these claims are not credible. Some are fugitives. Others are failed and discredited scientists. Their proof is fabricated, taken out of context, or outright manipulated. In this age of AI, artificial intelligence, nothing can be believed." Within minutes, major news outlets were running government-issued counter-stories. Colonel Harris was branded a traitor and a fugitive, accused of embezzlement and espionage. Tom Sheffield was labeled a senile old man with a grudge. Elliot was accused of falsifying research data for grants. And the Dillon brothers? Convicted poachers with a long rap sheet, supposedly trying to cash in on hoaxes. Saturday Night Live was already writing script with Bigfoot coming out of the forest, arm in arm with the Mothman, a Wendigo, and Dorothy, off to see the Wizard of Oz. Late night talk show hosts smirked. What? We're supposed to believe in Bigfoot now? What's next? The Loch Ness Monster? But disbelief couldn't drown the flood. Too many witnesses, too many voices, too much undeniable data. Footage slipped through back channels and onto the open web. One clip showed autopsy photos that no government seal could easily erase. The public reaction was immediate. Grocery stores saw runs on supplies in towns that bordered the forest. Even in the cities, rumors spread that if cryptids were real, they might already be living closer than anyone thought. And while the major news outlets screamed with sensational headlines like Bigfoot DNA, a government conspiracy, or hybrid soldier, the next Cold War, or a hoax, and even experts denounced latest whistleblower claim as internet nonsense, a quieter, smaller ripple was moving just beneath the surface. In a small town in northern Nevada, two people sat at a small diner discussing what to do with the information they had just received. Their channel wasn't flashy. They didn't have sponsors or a polished set or a research team. It was just the two of them, week after week, trying their best to publish good content that could please their existing fan base and grow more subscribers. What they did have was persistence and the ear of a couple thousand loyal listeners who trusted them for their honest and entertaining content. Their YouTube channel was called The Hidden Corners. And that night, while CNN cut between angry government spokesmen and laughing late-night comedians mocking the cryptid craze, Clay Steele uploaded a video titled The Cryptid War Begins. It was simple, just a stack of papers and screenshots that had been emailed to him over the past week. He spoke slowly and deliberately, his voice steady while the rest of the country spiraled into arguments and accusations and panic. Clay began, "These whistleblowers, they're not random, they're connected. The relic found near Black Dome, the laboratory records leaking out of Boulder, the missing files in Nevada, even the eyewitnesses who have surfaced. You are all being told that this is chaos, but it's a pattern. It's a cover-up." Clay looked at a printout of Elliot Brandt's DNA analysis of the tooth. This isn't fringe science. This isn't blurry photographs in the woods. This is data. This is proof. And if they're willing to silence military officials, scientists, and civilians who know too much, ask yourself, what else are they hiding? The video didn't trend right away. It didn't crash servers or blow up like the headlines screaming across mainstream TV. But in forums, in private chat rooms, Discord groups, and encrypted message boards, the hidden corners began spreading like wildfire. For those searching desperately for the truth beneath the noise, this wasn't comedy, it wasn't hysteria, it was the first clear voice breaking through the static. And while politicians drafted statements and late-night hosts made their jokes, Clay's voice rang steady and sharp. They want you distracted. They want you laughing. But remember, when the smoke clears, when the chaos dies down, the truth has a way of crawling out of the shadows. And in homes across America, from quiet bedrooms to lonely truck stops, people sat in the glow of their screens, not laughing and not dismissing, but listening. And as the Hidden Corners video ticked past its first million views, the world crossed a line it could never come back from. Across the country, in basements, hotel rooms, cluttered labs, and quiet offices, men and women who had carried too much for too long reached the same conclusion. Silence was no longer survival, it was complicity. And each, in their own way, took that step into the dark, toward exposure, danger, and truth. And in the shadowed edges of every state across the nation, forests, swamps, mountaintops, and abandoned farmhouses, creatures stirred, sensing their moment. The land itself seemed restless. In the Appalachians, fog rolled low between black ridge lines, and from the dark timber came the long, mournful scream of something older than the settlers who once cut trails there. The calls echoed down into the valley, rattling old windows in cabins thought abandoned. In the Louisiana swamps, ripples broke across stagnant water. Cypress trees shivered as something massive slid beneath. On the banks, an old trapper froze, a lantern trembling in his hand. He had hunted gators all his life, but whatever moved out there was no gator. On the Great Plains, the wind carried more than dust. Coyotes went silent. A shape rose from a wheat field, possibly tall. Its outline warped against the silver of the moon. And by the time headlights swept across the road, it was gone, but the grain still bent in its wake. On a snow-capped Montana peak, claw marks appeared fresh on the bark of an ancient pine. The marks were too deep, too wide. Ravens wheeled above, shrieking as if announcing the arrival of something long buried beneath the ice. And in a derelict farmhouse in Kansas, wallpaper curled and floorboards sagged. Then slowly, a door creaked open into the cellar. Heavy breathing rose from below. Something waiting. Something that had endured in silence, listening for this call. In the deserts, dust storms carried more than sand. Beneath the roar of the wind came a deeper vibration, like the pounding of a distant drum. When it passed, fresh tracks the size of dinner plates scarred the hardpan, leading towards the mountains. In the pine barrens of New Jersey, a deer stumbled into a roadside ditch, eyes wide, froth bubbling at its lips. The animal hadn't been shot, nor had been hit by a car. Something had run it to death. Above, tangled branches swayed, though there was no breeze. In the Pacific Northwest, where the forests breathed mist and shadow, every logger, hiker, and ranger felt it. The weight of unseen eyes watching from beyond the tree line. On the edges of small towns, empty swing sets creaked, though no one touched them. Dogs refused to cross property lines where nothing visible stood in their way. Across America, the forgotten stirred. Not myth, not legend, but flesh, blood, and teeth. And yet, the world went on. Cars hummed along the highways, phones buzzed with notifications, televisions flickered with endless chatter. The people were distracted, desensitized to the world around them. But the earth knew. The old ones knew. They did not need the internet. They did not need the news broadcasts or DNA evidence. Instinct alone told them. The world was shifting. The veil was breaking. Something long hidden had begun to stretch its limbs and shake the dust from its bones and test the boundaries of the shadows. It was the silence before the storm, the ripple before the flood. It was time. Well, friends, another good story from Ginger and the Hidden Corners. And man, oh man, we're heading for some good stuff. So come on back around next week and sit in on this fire. It'll be just as nice as this week. It might even be a little colder. My gosh, we'll have a bigger fire. Same old cup of coffee. Don't worry that. But until then, why, you know family's what it's all about. Family and friends. You take care of them. Now I'll see you again next week. Till then, this is Clay Steele. Good night.